such changes to like make stuff modernized or like overly woke?
I think I can get a 50-50 throw off one-on-one with George Pickens.
Give me 10 of those. Yeah, give me 10
Give
of
me
those.
10 of those.
I'm kind of getting sick of enemies to lovers. I'm gonna be honest. Yeah.
Welcome to Live from M5. I'm your host, Ashley, and I'm here with
Mrs. Siska.
Okay. And today we're actually going to be talking about media portrayal in like political conflicts. And so let me just start it off with the first question is, how do you perceive the portrayal of Israel, the Israeli and Palestinian war in media, and like including news outlets or documentaries or just literature in general?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like I need to probably preface this to let you know that I'm not a big news watcher.
Okay.
I've just not been a news watcher for most of my life. So I don't necessarily, I don't really watch a lot of TV. So how I get my news mainly is through long form podcasts. So I will listen to news and current events and things like that, and especially interviews. And I feel like that's where I get my information. Now, I hear when I listen to these long form interviews and podcast episodes, they're usually like an hour long, right? They'll talk about what's going on in the legacy media, and that it's people seem to be getting a lot of their information about the Israeli-Palestine conflict from like TikTok and small like little clips, and I feel like that's not a really great way to get the information, and it's really easy, I think, to spin that and just show like this 30-second little clip and not a lot of the background and the context and the information and things like that. So I think that people are getting a lot of their information from the legacy media, which I think on all sides is very skewed. I think we need to come to terms with the fact that the legacy media is very, very partial.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so talking about like social media and like small clips of like maybe misinformation or disinformation, how does media bias impacts people's like comprehension of these kind of impacts? I mean, political conflicts.
So I think my understanding is once you start watching, let's say, some YouTube videos, or I don't have TikTok, so maybe TikTok videos, I think what happens is you end up going down a rabbit hole, and things that are offered to you to view and to watch are things that you've been viewing and been watching, so that you actually end up finding yourself in a kind of an echo chamber, and you don't really actively pursue things that are on the opposite side or a different perspective. And so I think that that's probably really detrimental to somebody who's maybe trying to get the information, but they're really only seeing one side portrayed or one perspective portrayed.
Yeah. So moving on to like a classroom setting or like just school, the community in general, have you encountered political bias in any of your classroom settings?
I know as a student, especially in college, absolutely, right? There were times when it was very apparent what the worldview was of the instructor and what the political affiliation was of the instructor. On the other side of the aisle, as a teacher, I remember hearing this quote that there's no apolitical classroom. And I remember thinking at the time, this was years ago, I remember thinking at the time, like, I don't think that's true. Because I'm not big into politics. I'm not big into like keeping up with all that's going on in the news. Like whatever, I vote, right? But I was like, I don't think that my classroom is really political, and I don't think a lot of these classrooms are political. But I will say, in the last few years, probably since around 2020, that I see it more and more. And I've come to terms with seeing it more and more and being more aware, and then also making sure, looking at myself and, what's going on in my own classroom as well. But there's absolutely political bias in some classes.
So in terms of like how we're studying night, because, how do you like go about kind of talking about the Holocaust and or just any like kind of conflict in general in your classroom, especially if you're teaching? Like, how would you go upon kind of like going around the beating around the bush? Like, how would you?
Yeah. So specifically with night, like, I guess maybe probably what we should make sure that we do is we define our terms, right? So when you say political or politics in the classroom, so what are people's ideas of politics? What do you mean by politics? Because I think what happens sometimes is we talk about, oh, this is political, but in my view, I don't necessarily think it is political. So everybody has their own worldview. Like, no matter who you are, you have your own worldview. And I think sometimes people say, well, that's political. And for me, that would be more, maybe that's cultural, or maybe that's demonstrating your worldview, or maybe that's moral, right? It has to do with morality, not with politics. So with Night is, historical, and it's a memoir. And so I always try to approach it by offering the history of the Holocaust behind it. I've studied the Holocaust. I've read a lot about the Holocaust, looked into the Holocaust. And so like the things that I try to provide, like video clips or pictures or articles, short stories, poems, things like that. Like I try to make sure that, they're true, and I've looked into them and I've researched them. And so like for me, the Holocaust isn't a political event. It's a historical event, and it had more to do with morality and people's worldview, if that makes sense.
So in our classrooms, especially, I know that there are some people who may be insensitive to like these topics. How do you feel about students like insensitiveness towards like these historical events?
Do you mean like they're insensitive towards like the Holocaust in general,
Yeah.
or Night the book, or what?
I would say probably the Holocaust. Like if say we're watching a video and they like make fun of it, or maybe like say remarks or some like taunting. Like how do you feel like as a teacher who maybe feels like you should be teaching, like spreading awareness about it? How do you feel about that?
So I guess I would ask the question: what is specifically are they doing that you, or have you heard, or
maybe it's just like say like maybe we're on the walk outside the classroom and they're like making fun and just saying like, oh, like I could survive that, or I don't know how to explain it, but just kind of not really reading into it and like kind of feeling for the people,
not taking it seriously?
Yeah, not taking it seriously.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess I would wonder why they're doing that, right? And I think we cannot attribute their intentions and like assume that, oh, it's because they're cold or because they hate Jews, right? Or they don't believe the Holocaust happened. I think that we can't assume that. I think sometimes people deal with like violence and atrocity and inhumanity in different ways. Sometimes, when you're uncomfortable, there's a nervous laughter and you laugh it off because you just can't, if you actually sat down and realized what happened and the horror of things that happened then, things that are happening now, I think it could just be like break your heart. And I think people maybe as a coping mechanism, so they just make light of it and they try to seem braggadocious, like, oh, I could totally be fine with that, right? And so I don't know why, if students are doing that, on their own outside of classroom. I'm not sure why. I would love to have a conversation with them about why. And I think sometimes we just don't want to come to terms with things that have happened like that because they're horrible. And I think in order to come to terms with it, I think sometimes we have to imagine ourselves in those people's shoes. And then like maybe imagine your family. Like if this happened to your little sister, if this was your grandmother, like trying to put a personal face on things and stepping into those people's shoes and helping us to get that perspective might help a little bit with those people who aren't taking it seriously.
Okay, that's great. So I have a different kind of question. It's how would you help identify like news bias, or not news bias, but just media bias in general? How would you go upon identifying that?
First of all, every news has a bias. Every news. So you have to try to pick and choose the ones that are a little bit more honest with their bias. Like they might come out and say, hey, we are this kind of an association. Like we lean this way. So looking for that. And then there are some websites out there that try to rank the different media, and okay, this media falls over here, this media falls over here, this one's kind of in the unbiased or impartial category. Again, everybody has a bias, but trying to find that middle ground. And then if you do offer something on one side, try to offer something on the other side as well, because again, that echo chamber, we're trying to get ourselves out of the echo chamber and find different perspectives and different views, and just challenging yourself with the other, I guess, like side, for a better word.
Yeah.
I think people would be surprised if they looked at my podcast list that I listen to people I don't agree with. I listen to people who are radically different than me, and what I believe in my worldview. And when I read a lot of books, and I try to read things that like I don't necessarily agree with, but that sometimes I come away with, okay, that's a good point. That's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
So when you're saying like getting a wide perspective of everything, how do you think that's valuable to how you see things, and maybe differently than someone maybe that's just focused on one? Like, do you think it changed?
I think it's valuable because you can, hopefully people can be open to, okay, that's an interesting idea, and not that it changes their whole worldview or anything, but it could just kind of plant a seed. And okay, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. And helping a person to be more open and less closed off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we should wrap it up. But do you have any last words you want to say about like media bias, or just like saying anything like in your classroom that happens, or do you have any last words?
I'm a lover of words. So I love words. As you know, in my classroom, I have quotes all over. I put up a quote every day out. And so I have a couple quotes that I love. One is, the way to beat a bad idea is with a better idea. And so I think if you discuss different ideas, right, and hash that out. And then another quote is, be egalitarian towards people, but then be elitist towards ideas. And so the more that we can discuss and debate and talk about ideas respectfully, then everybody wins. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're going to end it here, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Trey, part of Rocklin Media. If you liked your podcast, go ahead and like and subscribe. And if you'd like to read more articles and learn more about your campus, go ahead and visit rocklinmedia.org.